Welcome to the next video. In this video, I want to show you how you can use the debugger to find bugs in your Python code. Since I'm using here VS Code, I will show you how you can start the debugger in VS Code, but in other IDEs like PyCharm, there's also a debugger built in to debug your Python code. So I've prepared here a little Python script, our test.py file, where I create two vector instances. And then I want to create a third vector instance based off the addition result of v1 plus v2. And maybe I have introduced a little bug here in our addition function and our code isn't working as expected. So whenever you encounter problems with your code, so your code isn't computing what it's supposed to do, for example, you should debug your code. And now I will show you how you can start the debugger. So I have to click here on the left side on the run button, and here we can choose run and debug, and then I will click here on Python file. So we would debug the current active Python file, and now the debugger would run through the whole code, and if we do not have any breakpoints, our debugger will just execute the whole code and won't stop. If you want to stop at any certain point, for example here, I saw, okay, in line 13, our computation is not correct. So I would set here in line 13 the debugger. So you have to click here left of the line number to create this little red dot here. And now I can restart the debugger again. Click here on Python file. And now our code will execute until line 13. And then our debugger will stop the execution of the program. So every line before is executed. So line 9 to 12, for example, here in our main function, and line 13 isn't yet executed. So now I see here with the debugger where we are. So where the debugger stopped, it's here highlighted in kind of a mix of yellow and green, I would say. And now I could step into the computation here in the line. So here on the upper right corner, you should now have this little slider here with some icons. So we have here the icon continue, step over, step into, step out, restart, and stop. So stop would just stop the debugger. So the debugger would be just terminated. If you click here on continue, the debugger would go on with executing the Python code until the next breakpoint is reached. Since we only have here one breakpoint, the debugger would just execute the rest of our program, and it would also terminate at the end. So the important parts here are the step over, step into, and step out. And if I want to check the computation here that is executed under the hood, I need to step into. So I click here on step into, and then I would go to our addition function of our vector.py file. So now I'm here in our computation, and as I said before, it's not very important to know about vectors right now. It's just that our x coordinates should be added here. So I accidentally put here a minus to subtract some values, but the correct way would be to add these values. So if I now would go over here, I want to go to line 127. I can just go one line ahead because currently I'm in line 126. So for this, if I want to just execute one single line, I can click here on the step over button, and then I would go from line 26 to 27. So now I'm here in line 127, and if I'm not sure if this line is correct, here it's pretty obvious because it's a not very complex Python code here in this line. But maybe even one line is very complex and you do not see directly if it's correct or not. You can execute the command in the debug console first before you execute the code line itself. So you can click here on debug console, and here you can execute Python commands. So I could copy this right hand side here and paste it here and just press enter, and it is executed here. So now I would see this subtraction would result in a value of 0. And now I have to check if this is correct. So I could print, for example, the values of the self vector instance. I could just type in here self, for example. I would see we have the vector 2, -2, and I could print here our other vector instance. And I would see there we have a vector 2, 3. So now I would check from a mathematical point of view, okay, if I add these two vectors, there should be, for the x-coordinate, the result of 4 and not of 0. Okay, so I would see here, okay, here is our problem. So I have just found the code line where the problem, where the bug appears. And now I would see, okay, I do not have to subtract here. I have to add these two values. Then before I rerun the code, for example, you can also just copy it again, paste it here, and you would see now, okay, the result is 4. So now the result is correct. So my recommendation would be, before you execute the code again or do something else, at first you can check in the debug console if the updated code is now computes now the correct values, for example, if you want to compute something. Okay, then if I just fix it, I can here restart the debugger. Restart, so then we would go to our first breakpoint. Now I could execute here this addition of the two vectors in the debug console also, and I would see the resulting vector is 4, 1, which is in this context correct. So then I had removed our bug in the code, and thanks to the debugger. Okay, then I want to show you something more, because we can create here a launch.json file, because otherwise we always have to click here on run and debug and, for example, click on Python file, or if you want to debug a Django application or whatever, you have to just choose it here always, and you can create a launch.json file to pre-configure this debug script. So I can create a debug file here. I will create a Python file, and now we would here have a configuration entry. So here the configurations is a list of different debugger scripts, I would say. Every configuration has a name, a type, a request, and what Python file, so for example, the current file is here stated, you want to execute. So this is here $file. So this is a file that I have opened currently. So if I have opened here our test.py file, the debugger will debug this file. If I have opened our vector.py file, and if I click now on here start debugging for the configuration Python current file, this file would be debugged, since here are no breakpoints set and nothing is called. Nothing is executed, obviously. But if I just want to debug our test.py file, we have here a breakpoint. So our debugger would stop here in line 13, as we saw before. So if you want to just stop the debugger, you can click here on the red square to just stop the debugger. And now you can create here some more configurations, for example. So if we want to create a configuration where we always want to debug a certain file and not the currently opened file, I can create here a new configuration entry, and I will call it Python debug test.py. You do not have to enter the file name here in the name. The name is up to you what you write here. But for the moment, I want to just call it debug test.py. Then the type should be Python if you want to debug a Python script. Then the request is launch, because we want to launch the program itself. It's not a program that is currently running, so you can attach a debugger to an already opened program, for example. But for now, we just want to start the program of our test.py file, and we just want to debug this program. So here at program, you can define which Python file you want to start, or which Python script you want to start. And here we can enter some variables that are predefined by VS Code. Workspace folder. So this would be the absolute path to our workspace root, which is at on my PC at users Jan Dropbox, for example. But if your project lies anywhere else, that should be the correct path. So then we can just type in here the relative path starting at our workspace folder. So it's in chapter 3 code testing, and then in the subchapter debugging, and here is the test.py file. So now I created a new configuration for the debugger. If I click again here on the debug icon, I have now here two options. So for every configuration you set in the launch.json file, you would have here one entry in this drop-down menu. So now I just take here python debug test.py. If I now just run our debugger, you can see here the full command of our debugger. And as we see here, the correct absolute path to the Python file is executed. So there are some variables that you can use in VS Code for your launch.json configurations, like this workspace folder, for example. If you want to read more about this, you can go to the official documentation of VS Code. There are all, I would say, variables defined that you can use to access some paths in your code or in your workspace. Okay, so now the correct program is executed, and the good thing about this is if I have clicked here in our vector.py file and I want to just debug our test.py file, I can just run this configuration here. With our other configuration, we would execute the currently open Python file. And if I want to debug our test.py file, but I have clicked here on our vector.py file because I wanted to look here something up, I would start the debugger here for the vector.py file and not for the test.py file. So the problem with this current file configuration is you have to click into the Python file that starts your Python program that you want to debug. And it's just easier to configure here a configuration where you have the absolute path to the correct Python file and you do not have to click here into the correct Python file every time. It's just easier for your workflow, I would say. Okay, that's how you can start the debugger and how you can execute the debugger. And my recommendation is whenever you encounter a bug or you don't understand something in your Python code, you can just start the debugger and execute line by line. You can evaluate some commands or operations here in the debug console and so on. Maybe there as a last side note, if I start the debugger again, you see here on the left side some more entries like the call stack. So at the call stack you would see which function was called by which function. So if I'm here now in our line 13 and I would step into it right now, I would see, okay, before we were in the main function, and in the main function, the addition dunder addition method of our vector class was called. So the call stack is here right now. Okay, we started the debugger itself, then our main function, and then we went to the addition function here. And that is pretty nice if you have a lot of nested function calls to see where this function call is coming from. So besides that, you have here variables and a watch entry. For the watch entry, you can enter some Python commands like in the debug console to see what the current value of this, like addition here is. So if I add this command here, I would always see at the current point what the result of this Python operation would be. You could also enter here some variables if you want to see that. So you can just add here a self, for example, to see what the current values of our self instance is. And you can open it here so you can see all the attributes that the class has, for example, and for all variables that lies in the current local scope or global scope, you can see it up here in the variables tab. So this debugger, as you can see, is pretty powerful to debug also very complex code. Our code here in the vector.py file isn't that complex, but if you have a lot of nested function calls, as I said, it's pretty nice to have a call stack. If you have a lot of local variables, like dozens of local variables, this tab isn't maybe that much useful. So you can just create here a watch for for example, you have 20 variables in total, but only 3 variables are important for your debugging task, so to say, then you can just add these 3 variables to the watch here and minimize the variables here to have a better overview over the variables you are looking for. So this watch is pretty nice to make your analysis easier while debugging. Okay, if you have any questions left for debugging, you can contact me. Otherwise, we will see us in the next video. Bye bye.